Okay, I think we're live. Can I get a few thumbs up on the chat to make sure that everything is working just as usual? Okay, I see Tegan connecting as well. All right, well, hello and welcome everyone. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Alejandro Ferrero, the Google DSC lead at Politecnico de Milano. And I want to thank you all for joining us today at this fantastic event. As you all know, we're hosting a blockchain series in collaboration with Chainlink Labs and The Graph. And last Wednesday, we had the pleasure to learn about smart contracts, oracles, DeFi, and a few other things from two Chainlink representatives. And if you couldn't attend the live event, you can check out the recording on our official YouTube channel. But as far as today goes, we're ready to explore graphs, subgraphs, decentralized applications, token economics, and much more, thanks to the Graph team. So after this brief introduction, I hope that everyone is ready to learn and have a good time as always. So I'm just going to hand it over to Tegan Klein and the rest of our team so they can get started with this awesome event, and they'll be taking it from here. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. And you have it.
Thank you so much. Let me just introduce myself. So thank you so much for hosting this great event. Really looking forward to it. As the students are kind of listening, many of you are the future of this technology and ecosystem, and you're part of kind of who we build for and why we're doing this. So really excited to be here today and presenting about kind of EdgeNode and the Graph ecosystem. So my name is Tegan Klein. I'm the co-founder and business lead of EdgeNode. I'm in the initial team behind the Graph network and protocol. My background's in traditional finance. So I started in investment banking at Bank of America and the financial institutions group. We did our own in-house mergers and acquisitions, also IPOs, so kind of looking at taking companies public from the securities side. And then I moved over to sales and trading at Barclays. I was on the fixed income desk to get kind of a faster paced environment. Enjoyed that work, but never really found my passion within it. I was at Barclays for 3 years. And then I learned about Ethereum and really just saw the opportunity to kind of redistribute resources and kind of create a new system outside of the system that existed at that time, the financial system that existed at that time. I joined a distributed VPN that was backed by Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia, Polychain, and many other great supporters in this ecosystem. I helped to launch Orchid, and then after launching, I kind of took a step back in the ecosystem and felt like a lot of the applications that were launching on Ethereum just were not competitive with centralized applications. And I firmly believe that blockchains are the future of the internet, and I want to make sure we kind of get to that future. And so I joined the Graph at this time. This was a little over a year ago, and helped to kind of lead business development and then GRT relations, and then started to kind of lead business. The Graph Foundation launched GRT, and EdgeNode was kind of formed. EdgeNode is the initial team behind. A lot of the initial team members live within EdgeNode, but EdgeNode is one of the many ecosystem participants within the Graph ecosystem. And now the Graph protocol is a decentralized protocol that kind of belongs to everyone and no one, really making data a public good. So it looks like we have the presentation here. We should just get back to the beginning of this presentation.
Just give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, are we good?
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So today I will be talking to you kind of about Bitcoin, Ethereum, the Graph, and beyond, really kind of demystifying DeFi and Web3. The team shared that, some of the feedback from the Chainlink event was that you wanted to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the other pieces of the ecosystem and really understand blockchain. So we can go to the next slide. So 2020 and 2021 was really when Bitcoin went institutional. And I think, you know, I've been excited about Bitcoin for a very long time because Bitcoin kind of revolutionizes finance. And for the first time, you don't need kind of an intermediary to be in the middle of your transfers with your money. You don't need a bank, you don't need a government, you don't need an institution, an individual to tell you, okay, you can send, you know, X amount of your own money to another person. And this is viscerally, like the moment that this became viscerally clear for me was, you know, when I saw Bitcoin Core actually do that transaction. And I think like when you interact with the software is really when it kind of hits home the power of this technology. And so, you know, last year and this year are really when it kind of went mainstream. And I think now Bitcoin is no longer, oh, it could go to zero. Oh, it, you know, maybe it'll be an asset class. It's kind of a lottery ticket. Now it's a real asset class. And so corporate treasuries and institutional investors are kind of involved in crypto and Bitcoin now. MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor, you know, put part of his treasury in Bitcoin, as well as Jack Dorsey from Twitter. And I almost feel like now it is irresponsible not to allocate a portion of your, as a capital allocator, either for a business or for your individual self or for a client, it is irresponsible not to put at least a portion of that into crypto. And so we're starting with Bitcoin, but I foresee that kind of going to other crypto assets as well. And you know, it's very common that you'll hear Bitcoin is digital gold, but I'll kind of make the argument in this presentation that is so much more than that. We can go to the next slide. So the question is, you know, do you believe the dollar will continue to depreciate relative to Bitcoin, as we've seen the Fed print an insane amount of money, and like actually insane amount of money, $9 trillion in last year alone, which is 22% of our total circulating supply of USD was printed last year, which is wild. Like no individual should have that much power, but they do, and it's impacting the US dollar. And so the question really is like, will that continue? And I believe that it will, but it's kind of a question for you all to answer for yourself. And Bitcoin is better gold than gold. It's better fiat than fiat. The Bitcoin market is kind of the gold market and the savings market combined. And when I say the savings market, you can think stocks, bonds, fiat, bank savings, all of that kind of combined. When you hold Bitcoin, everything else kind of depreciates in value compared to Bitcoin. It looks like it's getting cheaper. It looks like fiat's getting cheaper, college education's getting cheaper, everything's getting kind of cheaper when you hold Bitcoin. And so the question is, will that continue? And I think that's one that you guys can answer for yourself. We can go to the next slide. So Ethereum, it was created after Bitcoin. Vitalik created Ethereum. Ethereum exploded the narrative from beyond just finance to really any use case, any asset class. Smart contracts allow for anyone to transact without an intermediary, which is really exciting. And Ethereum is kind of decentralized, open source, permissionless, all the values that I hold near and dear to my heart, as well as kind of the graph ecosystem. And so Ethereum was the platform, you know, most development is happening on Ethereum. And so the graph started with Ethereum because of that development. So there was this narrative that Ethereum was, you know, there weren't many users. And that's because, you know, the infrastructure on top of Ethereum just wasn't there. And this was about a year ago. And so the graph allows for you to kind of access Ethereum data and serve that data easily to your users. And so I'll get into this a little bit more, but just kind of wanted to give you the high level on Ethereum in this slide. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. And the graph, so the graph is kind of the connective tissue that brings blockchain data to the web. So we started with Ethereum, but we kind of believe that we will live in a multi-blockchain future. And the graph is the connective tissue with all the other blockchains kind of underneath. And so no matter that underlying technology, the graph is there to support kind of that abstract complexity away for developers. So you can you think of it like you have Ethereum or a different blockchain on the bottom, and then you have the graph, and then you have the applications on top. And so the graph abstracts about 12 months line of code away from developers so that they can just focus on great user experience of their applications. So, you know, the graph revolutionizes finance. I think Bitcoin revolutionizes finance. The graph and Ethereum really kind of revolutionize the internet. And the analogy I like to use is what Google does for the web, the graph does for blockchains. So in Web 2.0, the centralized internet, you had all this great data, but until Google came out with the search functionality, you couldn't access that data. It was out there, but you couldn't get to it. Same with blockchain data. It's there, it's just difficult to get to. And so the graph allows for kind of developers and users to easily access that data and serve that data to users of applications. So the graph is powering DeFi and the broader Web3 ecosystem, as well as many NFTs, which I'm sure Eva will get into. She's the NFT queen. So there are many applications. Right now, there's over 9,000 subgraphs, which are a proxy for applications on the graph within the graph ecosystem. And those subgraphs have been created by over 14,000 active developers. So, you know, applications that you use all the time or that we use all the time in this ecosystem, like Uniswap, Synthetics, Balancer, Aave, Gnosis, Numerai, a lot of them use subgraphs to pull data quickly and efficiently from the Ethereum blockchain. So this is just kind of user testimonial. A lot of developers really love using and building with the graph just because it saves them a lot of time, it saves them money, and it, you know, just makes it easier for them to build. I think once they start using subgraphs, they can't stop. And so it's just, this is kind of speaking to some of that excitement from the community. So the graph has become a default part of the stack. So this is kind of visualizing that stack so that you can see that. And so, as I mentioned, you have the blockchain at the bottom, then the smart contracts, the subgraphs, and the UI. And the graph has the potential to become larger than any layer one because we integrate with every piece of the stack. We're here. The graph is there to index and query everything within the blockchain ecosystem, within the Web3 ecosystem. So now that the Graph protocol has launched, as I mentioned, the Graph Foundation launched GRT. Edge and Node is one of the many organizations that lives within the Graph ecosystem. To date, there are over 170 indexers, which are each their own kind of businesses within the Graph network. And so this is just kind of to chat about that distinction. So as I mentioned, the graph is going multi-chain. So we did a really exciting announcement where we are integrating Polkadot, Near, Solana, and Celo in addition to Ethereum. Also, many EVM compatible chains like POA, Phantom, Binance Smart Chain are all supported currently. And, you know, without the graph, I don't think that DeFi would have been possible. As I mentioned, you know, it allows for speed and transparency. And I think that was really the key to kind of the excitement within DeFi, and really excited to see kind of more innovation to come. Yeah, that's it from this slide. So query growth has been quite parabolic. We saw over 13 billion queries in January alone. This is up from 1 billion queries in June of last year and a few hundred queries at the beginning of last year. So really speaking to all of the growth within the ecosystem, within the Web3 ecosystem. And so, yeah, just a lot of growth within subgraphs developers. There's over, I think, 14,000 active developers now that have built over 9,000 subgraphs. So this breaks down subgraphs by vertical. So DeFi make up the majority of that, but we've also seen kind of arts and collectibles are really the NFT bucket, and we've seen that grow almost double, I think, in the last, I would say 8 months. We've seen, I think it used to be around 12% and now it's over 14%. So that's exciting. Also seeing an uptick in gaming and DAOs and inter-blockchain, so interwrapped like BTC on the Ethereum blockchain. Also seeing more uptick in oracles and marketing, and hope to see more in governance and other exciting areas as well. And then this kind of breaks down the queries. So the majority of these queries are happening within DeFi. That's really where a lot of the movement is. Also, I think NFTs have really upticked since this chart was made. So excited to see kind of where all the query volume lies. And so we're just kind of transitioning to the internet age. I think tokens are the way to have, sustainability when you have open source, decentralized, and permissionless technology. Previously, a lot of open source developers had to rely on kind of donations to have sustainable businesses. And I think that, we're transitioning away from kind of SaaS or centralized business models into more of a decentralized token ecosystem. And so really excited for that. I think, it took a while for people to get their minds around SaaS as a business model, and then Salesforce turned that into a $200 billion industry. And so I think tokens are kind of the next evolution of the business model, but I think it'll take people a little bit longer to kind of get their minds around this entirely new ecosystem. So this slide breaks down our token economics. So the graph is a decentralized protocol, and the graph token is kind of a work utility token, and it's driven by incentives, which are on the next chart. It kind of breaks down the architecture for the graph token. This is that architecture. So we have indexers, curators, and delegators. I'll kind of get into that a little bit more. We can go to the next slide. I know we're kind of running late on time. Again, like there's consumers on one side of the market, indexers, which are kind of staking within the graph ecosystem. I'll get into more details in the future slides. So the graph has there's 4 main components within the graph ecosystem. There's indexers, which are the node operators. This is the most technical role. So indexers stake GRT on subgraphs. How they identify those subgraphs is through the curators. Curators identify the open data alpha within the graph network. So if you know of a new cool subgraph that's coming out, the curators kind of mint signal on a bonding curve to signal to the indexers that they should stake on that subgraph. And that's really important when you have permissionless technology, because anyone can create a subgraph. And then delegators, this is the least technical role. So they just identify which indexer they want to allocate their stake to. And each indexer has their own economic model. And that helps the delegators then help secure the graph network. And then on the other side of this, you have the consumer, or you have like the app developer who pay for query costs on behalf of their users, so that their users aren't kind of encumbered by the payments. And you can kind of imagine this similar to how Ethereum gas costs work. I think we can skip these next 3 slides just because we're running late on time. But the indexers, delegators, and curators all earn GRT in the network. Delegation right now, you can earn over 20% APY by delegating on the graph network today, which is much better than kind of a savings rate. And delegation, one thing that's unique about delegation in the graph network is that delegators cannot be slashed. So unlike Cosmos, delegator stake is safe. Indexers, on the other hand, if they act maliciously, they can be staked, they can be slashed. We can move to the next slide. So Web3, we're all, very excited about the potential of Web3. I think we're seeing kind of a mass exodus from Web2 into Web3. A lot of engineers and builders are coming to build applications within this ecosystem. At Edge and Node, we just hired a top engineer from Google. He was managing a 100-person team, also someone from Amazon. So really excited to kind of see, now that we have this decentralized infrastructure in place, people don't need to focus on monetizing people's data or selling people ads, which is where I think a lot of the brilliant minds in the world are working right now. So it's really exciting. I think we're almost at the turning point where there's still a few other pieces of the stack that need to be identified before we'll see like a mass flood, but that means it's really early days. And so very excited about Web3. So this is just kind of a snapshot of the Graph network. So the Graph was launched in December of last year. And so since then, over 27% of the total GRT supply has been staked in the network. And so indexers are staking and delegators are delegating to those indexers, which is really exciting because I think, looking at Ethereum, I think it's just a little over 1%. Was allocated, in ETH 2.0 as stake. So this is really exciting to see so much being staked within the Graph network. We can move to the next slide. So this is just kind of talking about protocols. At Edge and Node, we're really excited about protocols kind of becoming the future. This kind of goes along the lines of just tokens as a business model. And so, yeah, really excited about protocols. There's so many more that will be needed. And so just kind of identifying those pieces to the puzzle. We can move to the next slide, but I just think, we will see spinning up a dApp on a blockchain become as easy as creating a website is today. And this is just kind of chatting a little bit about that movement that we're seeing from Web 2 into Web 3. The internet wasn't created to monetize people's data or sell us ads, but that's what it's incentivized to do. And so, with this new technology, we can kind of make a new world for everyone to kind of get involved with and prosper from. This is just kind of going on to where we are in time. We can kind of skip ahead. I know we're over time. DeFi and Web3 will kind of run the market. We can kind of go past this as well. I've tapped into that. And so this is how you can get involved. So, we need help building this future. And so you can delegate on the network today. You can index. Curation is coming soon on the Graph network. So kind of stay tuned for Curation to launch. The Graph Foundation has a grants program. If you want to build something within this ecosystem, you're eligible for a Graph grant. If you need funding, that's really how you can get it. Also, Edge and Node and the foundation are both hiring. So if you are interested in kind of actually working with either of us, you can apply and let us know. And then Reem will share the social media in the chat so that you can kind of follow us and stay updated. And that's it. Happy to answer any questions if anyone has any kind of burning questions.
Yeah, we have a Q&A section on the right, I believe, with the where the chat is, and you have a question. There's a question specifically for you. What will be the tipping point for Web3? To go with that, when will be the moment you personally feel like the graph is really stretching its legs?
Yeah, so I would say the Graph network right now is in kind of beta form. And so there's exciting kind of updates coming. And so looking forward to that. And I think once we see kind of actual more query growth on the network, that'll be like the moment that really solidifies it for me, and I think a lot of people within the ecosystem. But also, the Graph is just one piece of the decentralized stack. We need to decentralize everything. Radical just launched. They're kind of decentralizing code, beyond GitHub. GitHub is kind of a central point of failure, and it's locking a lot of developers in. So we need to kind of decentralize GitHub, and that's a problem that Radical is tackling. Also, EPNS is decentralizing notifications. And so this is just like the beginning. We need so many more tools. We need, social networks. We need decentralized music. Audius is kind of tackling that. There's so much that we need, and also just like a decentralized Asana. We have like a million tools within Edge and Node, and we're like, we don't want to use all these tools. Like, we need Web3 to come out with like one-stop shop for all of these applications. So there's still a lot to do, but it means that there's a lot of alpha right now. So
Yeah,
it's early days. Join us, come and help us build this future of the stack.
for sure. That's super exciting. I think I saw Elon Musk tweeting something about music and NFTs pretty recently. So that was fun to see. This question, I asked this question, but hopefully more people, more developers from PoliMi have the same question. What kind of stack or programming languages do you need to get started, not only on the graph, but like overall in this decentralized, ecosystem that these kinds of projects are building?
I can take that one, Tegan. Yeah, so there's multiple ways, I guess, to contribute to the stack in the graph. At the most basic level as a subgraph, you need to know TypeScript and GraphQL for querying the subgraph. So it's very easy then for any Web 2 developer, any front-end developer to get involved. And long-term, with some additional features to subgraphs like mutations, you can actually call functions on a blockchain directly from the subgraph. So that means that if you just know TypeScript, maybe eventually you can be a full Web3 developer, whereas right now you might need to know Solidity also, or whatever the underlying blockchain language is to create the smart contract. And then separately for indexers, so running an indexing node is a little bit more complex than a typical Ethereum node. You do need to set up a Kubernetes environment, and Rust is the main language. But we are, increasing our documentation to make it a lot easier for new indexers to come on board.
Okay, yeah, that answers my question. Hopefully everybody else got it. There's one more about the graph supporting Cardano in the future, when smart contracts will be available in the Cardano ecosystem. I guess people are interested. Cardano.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the graph is kind of a neutral platform, and so it will support everything within the ecosystem. It's just a matter of kind of how the foundation prioritizes that development and what the community wants. So if you want to see, that specific blockchain or a different blockchain, please kind of let us know, use your voice, and let us understand kind of the development that's happening, how the developers need the graph, and we are really excited to listen.
Okay, let me see if there are any more questions. Everything's good. So I guess we can continue with the event.
Awesome. Yeah, let me start sharing my screen then.
Okay.
Oh crap, I have to give permission, sorry. Okay. Can you guys see the presentation? Yes, okay, cool. I can't see you guys, so I'm not sure. Okay, so my name is Eva Balin. I'm currently the director of the Graph Foundation. I started working with the Graph, I think about 2 years ago on the Edge and Node side, so the initial team, and then I've transitioned over to the foundation, which is really the organization to steward the ecosystem and support governance and other contributions. So we really build a decentralized ecosystem for the Graph. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more on the architecture and just diving into some of the topics that Tegan touched on. So just before we get started, here are a few of our links. If you guys want to follow along, there's the Top Hat discussion that Reem shared, and also our Discord's the best place to chat with our developers. So really the point of the graph is to be a global API. So, one of the visions of Web 2 was to create a semantic web, which easily indexed all the data in the world, and it made it really easily accessible. Some people would argue that the semantic web itself failed, even though, other providers like Google have succeeded. And so the graph's vision is to really become that standard indexing API for all Web3 data. And because we believe, like Tegan said, that Web3 is the future, that means basically all data in the world. Here's a great quote just from one of our top developers in our community. Adam from LivePeer has been building on the graph for a few years now, and he really just understands how much it's improved his own experience. So as Tegan mentioned, these are our sort of top categories for subgraph usage. And I just wanted to highlight where we're seeing the up and coming usage. So NFTs are definitely a hot button. Right now, Known Origin is the top marketplace that's being indexed by the graph, but we're excited to see other platforms like Zora and Foundation come out. And we really want to get all NFT projects using the graph because it's just way simpler. From a developer experience to be able to query NFT data and metadata is quite challenging. And so using the graph makes it incredibly easy. And on the DeFi side, we're seeing most usage coming from AMMs, other strategies, maybe like a vault strategy, and derivative platforms. So the main problem we're trying to solve is that querying is really hard. It requires you building your own proprietary server, your own proprietary backend, and also when smart contracts that are open source are being used by this different apps, that's redundant work for indexing that data that otherwise could be open source. And so subgraphs solve many problems, one being a new standard layer of indexing, but another one is just actually enabling open source sharing, right? So if you're querying the Uniswap smart contract and your friend is, you guys could use the same API instead of building separate APIs. And one thing that is a little understated is just how much this impacts UX. So, load time, how quickly your app is able to sync most recent data, whether an indexer or your server is running. All these things are really critical for user experience as we get into more product market fit with crypto. So I like to think about the graph vision in 3 ways. So one is the open APIs, making it open source data access. Another is serverless dApp development. So the ability for dApps to not be able to be taken down. And we've seen some examples of this already happening in Web 2. So, AWS taking down Parler and also Twitter server going down in the fall because of some hack. None of these things should be happening. And so when you have a network of indexers that are, processing queries, you can ensure that your dApp isn't relying on a single server. And the third thing is a decentralized data market. I am a data nerd, so I'm personally really excited about the idea of processing queries at different costs based on maybe the speed or the quality or complexity of the query. And it really opens up a world of monetizing data in a way we haven't before. So here's a little visual of just how we differ. I think it's sometimes hard for people to understand why the graph is, in addition to a subgraph, also a decentralized network layer. And the key is that no application that calls itself decentralized should be relying on a centralized stack. And so the indexers are always there ready to serve queries at any time. And the curators are there to signal on which subgraphs or which sort of APIs are the highest quality and should be prioritized. So indexers will have to stake GRT when they set up their node, and delegators can also delegate their GRT to indexers to increase that indexer stake. And basically staking in the network is to ensure security. So, if indexers ever do anything malicious, part of their stake is slashed. And as Tegan mentioned, delegators are not slashed. But indexing is, really the backbone of the network. And so ensuring that indexers and delegators are aligned is something that we're really focusing on now as we have more proposals for protocol governance coming out. And some of these things can relate to, inflation. It could relate to more technical parameters. It could even just relate to how indexers and delegators interact. And then on the curator side, so curators also stake GRT, but they stake it on a specific subgraph. And based on the amount that is signaled or staked on the subgraph, that's how indexers know which of the APIs to prioritize. So you can imagine that a Uniswap subgraph, which is very popular, will likely see a lot of signal, and indexers know that's the subgraph they should prioritize. And curators and delegators also earn a portion of the query fees earned by those indexers and subgraphs. So just another visual of how this works. Our beautiful designer Carl likes to be eccentric with these, but basically all on-chain event data or state changes can be captured in a subgraph. It makes it way easier to query blockchain data. And the graph network is just running the servers basically to enable that it's curated in a way that an application can process it. So a little more on the payment flows. Here is, a run through of where all the payments occur for each of the stakeholders. So we have 4 stakeholders: curators, delegators, indexers, and consumers. And the consumers basically are dApp developers. So you can imagine somebody that's maybe building a DeFi aggregator dApp is the consumer. They're the ones that are paying indexers to process the queries. So instead of them running the server themselves, and instead of paying a developer, dedicated to the database, they're paying query fees to the indexers and curators. And this technically could be, the app developer. In theory, it could also be a protocol team. There's maybe a world where the whole Uniswap protocol DAO is subsidizing all Uniswap subgraph queries. So there's a lot of flexibility here on who is in each of these roles. And here's a little more about, the payment flow for indexers specifically. So there's a negotiation process between indexers and dApps. Indexers will price their queries based on, different parameters. So that might be the speed of query processing, that might be their specific configuration, and different dApps might have different trade-offs that they're interested in. So naturally, a DeFi app maybe wants lower latency, but maybe, an NFT dApp wants higher quality and is fine with latency. And here's a little more on curating. So every subgraph has a bonding curve, and that's sort of how you decide what the query fee payouts will be per signaler or curator, sorry. And so every user deposits stake, and that mints signal, these sort of signal shares. And this is to ensure that we are actually committing people to the signal they're creating. DeFi is very fickle, and we don't want our users and the curators to be just bouncing around between subgraphs based on, maybe some perceived benefit, but rather are invested in that subgraph's quality and want to continue signaling on that subgraph because they believe in the trajectory of that project. So here's a little more of just a technical breakdown. As you can see, the graph node is the center. This is the indexer node that I mentioned that also uses Kubernetes and Rust. And we also rely on Ethereum and IPFS for querying events right now. But as Tegan mentioned, there will be many other chains added to that list. So again, going back to why the network needs to be decentralized, the thing that really makes it clear for me is just how much less hardware, every project team has to run. So, in the grand scheme of things, a dApp developer who is just maybe coding a DeFi app together, they shouldn't necessarily need to run a node to be able to query the blockchain. And so having these dedicated indexer nodes who essentially are experts around the world really makes it way more efficient for, an app to query data based on its needs. And the other thing is it acts as a backstop. So in case your server were to ever go down, you now have this network of indexers who can always serve your queries at any time. And currently we have over 160 indexers around the world. And so this isn't even, a US or, a continental project. We really do have global distribution, ensuring that queries can be processed anywhere. So here are a few of the use cases that we're excited about. DeFi and NFTs are clear, but DAOs are starting to see their day a little more now. So as we see more voting on DeFi DAOs and more of these sort of community DAOs come to fruition, I'm sure we'll see a lot more queries there. On the marketplace side, it's also been quite interesting as we bifurcate what it means to have a marketplace. So we're seeing things like NFT marketplaces. We're also seeing like upcoming Shopifys. So I know Origin is working on these sort of Shopify marketplace storefronts. And also prediction markets are becoming more popular. So on the experience for a dApp developer, who we're calling the consumer, you can imagine it'll be very similar to AWS or paying for any kind of cloud services where the user will just top up an account to pay for those query fees. And so we really are trying to streamline the process so it doesn't feel like users are interacting with a crypto app. Here's just a screenshot of what you will see at the Network Explorer if you go there now. So Tegan ran through a little bit about delegation, but basically you see this purple little circle on the right. That's where you'd click to delegate. And you can choose indexers based on certain parameters. So maybe it's their query fee cut, maybe it's their performance, or maybe it's marketing, because ultimately, you are trusting these entities as members of the ecosystem with your data. And so a lot of these have really, hit the ground running with creating either more services or more documentation or tutorials to help delegators better understand who they're choosing. So here's a little more about the graph roadmap. So as you can see, we had a pretty busy Q3, Q4 of 2020, but now the network is launched. We're really focusing on subgraph migration, getting curation live, making sure that the network is safe for indexers. And also we've started having some GIPs, graph improvement proposals, to start changing some parameters. And then, as Tegan mentioned, multi-blockchain is a really big focus. We really believe in a blockchain agnostic future, that even though the graph was built on Ethereum, every chain should be able to access blockchain data easily. And we're really here to unite the ecosystem like that. And then lastly, Graph Foundation grants is an ongoing process. So of course, if you have any interest in building something for the graph, either related to subgraphs or community or improvements to the node, we are all ears. So I just want to go over a little bit about the decentralization vision and governance. So this quote really sticks with me. People who say full decentralization is overkill, you only need non-custodial, are missing the point. A fully decentralized or serverless application is valuable because it gives users the confidence that it will always be there, so you can safely build on top of it. And really, we want to bring this home on every layer of the stack. And so it's not only critical that the indexer cohort and also delegators and curators are decentralized, but also that everything we're using as the graph protocol is also decentralized. And that's kind of where our GIP process comes in. So our graph improvement proposal process is, suggestions for improving the protocol. Maybe it's a specific parameter, maybe it's an address change, maybe it's, additional functionality, or maybe it's even, application standards. So similar to ERCs, we want to start creating standards for subgraphs and APIs and making it a lot easier for developers to build. And so this is sort of a three-pronged process. Ultimately, the GIP is what is getting reviewed, but we want to include sort of these intermediary meta processes of GRC, graph request for comment, and GRP, graph request for proposals, which we want to host on the forum, forum.thegraph.com. And this is where we want to help the community actually independently come to solutions that are beneficial to the ecosystem. So we really don't, see Edge and Node or the foundation as the central contributors. It really is a decentralized ecosystem. So we've already seen some great proposals come through from third parties and indexers, and we'd love to see that continue. And so the graph governance process, the GIP process, is technically, open. Anybody can, talk about GIPs, propose improvements, but the Graph Council ultimately makes the decision. And so our current process is hosting these sort of signaling votes on Snapshot. Snapshot's a pretty popular governance tool that's being used by a lot of apps. It's a way to get signal off-chain and really get the community sentiment before actually committing on-chain. And so we have these two proposals currently going on Snapshot. And when you open them, you'll go to the Radical repo and you can see all of the details of the parameterization or changes. And so after this, the Graph Council will review and then be implemented. And we're still, in this transient process of refining it, but so far we've gotten quite good engagement and we'd like to, see that continue. So if you have any thoughts, please head to the forum and you can share your thoughts on these GIPs. So just a bit about our future. So multi-blockchain is the next big focus. But after that, we'd really love to see every single application be querying the graph. I like to say our mantra is index everything. And so here are a few of the really key areas, that query data every day. So naturally, wallets are constantly querying balances, exchanges and DeFi apps query trades and volumes, maybe APY and other more complex calculations that you can actually do in a subgraph. Things like block explorers and data aggregators would be heavy users. And also more interesting products like music, video, images. So any NFT app can easily query NFT data, gaming and collectibles. That'll become incredibly useful as the number of games increase. And one we're particularly excited about is seeing social expand. So there's already been apps like Mirror that have come out, and EPNS like Tegan mentioned, but we'd love to see more because that's really interesting data to be indexed because it showcases human behavior on chain. Here are just a few examples of the UIs that are querying data, so making it a little more visual, what we mean by balances or trade statistics. And there's really no limit to what kind of applications can be powered. So the really interesting one here is the top right corner is Unlock Protocol is the sort of subscription platform with Ethereum. And their data is actually indexed on the graph. And so in theory, any transaction that occurs when someone is paying via Unlock Protocol on Forbes is technically indexed on the graph. And one other area we're curious about is how we can use subgraphs for more complex data and analysis. So as I mentioned, you can actually do correlations and calculations in the subgraph. And one in particular, TVL, total value locked, has a few different variations of calculations in the ecosystem. And so I think we can use subgraphs to be a lot more analytical and accurate about things like total value locked based on state changes. And so there's a lot of room here to even maybe standardize across DeFi apps and create, a standard TVL subgraph. So we're excited to see more contributors think of things like this so we can really build up the richness of our subgraphs. Yeah, and so here's just a few final examples of the apps that are using us. As Tegan mentioned, we have thousands of subgraphs already deployed, and so that is growing, over 20% month over month. And if you need any help, integrating a subgraph or building one, you can always join our Discord and chat with the team. And you can also head to the Explorer if you want to play in the playground, just to test out some GraphQL queries and search for any live subgraphs today. And that's it.
Okay, that was really interesting. I love the graph. I love. I got started in programming through APIs, so just knowing now that like APIs are being decentralized and that kind of stuff is really excited. I just have a question about the GRT token. And right now it is running on a different net that will be changed to the main net in December, if I understood that correctly.
No. So the GRT token is an ERC20. Okay. It's on Ethereum, and the entire protocol is on Ethereum. So our smart contracts and state channels are also on Ethereum. And GRT will continue to be an ERC20 token. So okay. All these multi-blockchain expansions are just support for those other chains. So we can now query them, but the graph will continue to stay on Ethereum.
And will there be a new token for the mainnet?
So GRT is the mainnet token. Mm-hmm. That's the token that you currently use to stake. So if you go to network.thegraph.com, that's where you'd stake, as a delegator on an indexer. Indexers also currently stake GRT tokens when they run their indexer node, and curators will then also stake GRT on subgraphs once curation goes live.
Okay, that makes sense now. Okay, I think this was more clear for everyone because nobody had many questions. So I think we can keep going.
Awesome. I think Dave is next.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I'm just joining in here. Gonna do a quick demo of what you can actually do with the graph and how to create a subgraph. I'm going to quickly share my screen here. Can you guys see this right now? It's like the graph doc.
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Cool. So yeah, you guys have gotten this whole entire download about what the graph is, and now I'm a developer at the graph. I'll show you guys how you could actually create a subgraph and just the simple steps. This is going to be a very simple example, and it should be easily followable by anybody who understands a little bit of code, and even if you don't, you should still be able to follow what's going on. And you can definitely remember to come to our Discord and ask us any questions here. There's a lot of people, from the Edge and Node team that can help you. There's also people from the foundation, as well as a lot of community members who answer all these questions all the time. So it's a very vibrant community, and you can come and figure out how to build a subgraph and get all the help that you need. And so, a good place to start is actually the Explorer, which I'm sure you guys have heard about. And if you look here, these are a bunch of subgraphs that are on display that have been built. And it's actually very useful to look at a lot of these and figure out how they work, what you'd want to do. And the one that I always think is one of the greatest examples is Uniswap, because it's one of the most heavily used, and everybody who's like in crypto has probably heard of Uniswap before. And you can start seeing all this right here is the play, and it just allows you to interact with the subgraph in an interesting way and get back data by querying it. And this is all very high level, and we're going to go into actual details of how to create a subgraph, get it to show up in the hosted service here, and see what it's like to query the data and how to actually build a subgraph. And so the next place that I would start to describe what to do is to go to the docs. So we go to the docs, we click on the we click on the hosted service information. And this is going to explain to us, what the graph is, how it works, and what a subgraph really is. And we can skip to the quick start section, and it kind of describes all this stuff that you're going to need to start from absolute scratch. And I won't go into the details of setting up Ganache, because we don't actually have to do that here. And if you do Ethereum development, you've probably heard of what Ganache is and running a local graph. What we're actually going to do is use the hosted service. And the hosted service is what I've showed to you guys here. And it's basically, it's running in the cloud, and it's our service that allows people to deploy subgraphs and see them being used very easily. And it's kind of like a really good way to bootstrap your subgraph and get it out there. Whereas as the network gets more mature, a lot of these subgraphs are actually going to exist on the graph network. And we're going to see, and in that scenario, people are paying for queries, whereas the hosted service is this kind of slimmed down version where you can put it up there for free and people can interact with it. But it won't be as, it'll never be a fully decentralized network, the hosted service here. So it's kind of like two different things to look at, but this is a perfect place for practicing and getting used to everything. And so I'm going to first, it would probably be good to go through, what is a subgraph really? And there are a couple things to remember. Like if we go here, define a subgraph, you'll have to have a little bit of Ethereum background to understand what I'm talking about here. But there's essentially three things that matter in a subgraph, right? And so the first one that I always refer to as the most important piece, like code to look at when you're looking at a subgraph, is the subgraph manifest. And the subgraph manifest simply is like an instruction manual for the graph node to be able to know what blockchain data to pull from Ethereum. So if you consider the whole entire Ethereum blockchain, it's terabytes of data. And what the graph does is it allows you to index a subset of data from any blockchain that is connected to the graph node software that we can index right now. So we're specifically talking about Ethereum. And you can see this here, right? Like data sources. This is where we start to break down the subset of blockchain data that we want this subgraph to contain. So first we pick, the network, and this network is going to be Ethereum. Now it could be a different network like Fandom or some of the other ones out there, but we're going with Ethereum. And then we actually point to a specific address on Ethereum. So this is going to lead us to a contract that's called Gravity, which is a super simple contract that we'll go over, and as well as the start block to start looking at this contract, because this was the block that it was actually deployed on chain. You don't have to look at any previous blocks before that. And so now we've narrowed it down to the specific blockchain we want to look at, as well as a specific contract we want to look at. Next, we're going to look at specific handlers that we want to get the data from. So we have a few here: an event handler, a call handler, and a block handler. So an event handler handles any events that are emitted from this contract. And an Ethereum event essentially just whenever a transaction happens on chain, some of these transactions contain events, which are useful information for people interacting with the chain to know what happened. So whenever this event gets emitted on Ethereum, new Gravatar, the subgraph and the graph node will actually record this data. And then you can do whatever you want with that data with mappings, which I'll explain shortly. And what's so great about all this is, as you can see, we have two event handlers here. A call handler is based on the function that is actually called. So if a specific smart contract function is called, you can invoke this handler and then store data within the subgraph, as well as block handlers. So you could write a handler that gets executed on every single block of the that advances on the Ethereum blockchain. So as you can see, we've just taken the whole sphere of blockchains that can be indexed by the graph and took it down into just Ethereum, and then just a specific contract, and then just a specific event or a call handler or a block handler. And now you see what the power is. It's instead of looking at this whole entire sphere of blockchain data that exists, you narrow it down to the specific subset of information that you want, and then you can build these rich subgraphs that can return data that could be something as complex as, a historical time series of Uniswap transactions that have happened, which is really hard to get from just reading the subgraph. Or just reading the blockchain itself. That's not what Ethereum is created for. That's what the graph has been created for, is building this layer on top that allows, humans to interact with the blockchain and read it very easily. And so that's the most important file to look at when you are trying to figure out what a subgraph really is supposed to do. Now, the next really important file to look at is the GraphQL schema. And a good way to think about the GraphQL schema is it's really like this is where you start to get into this section where the developer is deciding what that data they want from the blockchain should be stored as, and how it's stored, and how to present it to people. And so you're basically creating, an object type or like a description of the information that you're trying to get from the blockchain. So this developer, creates this type called Gravatar, which is an entity, and it has 5 fields. And they're pretty straightforward: an ID, like a unique ID to identify it in the database, the owner. So this is going to be an Ethereum address, a display name, which is very self-explanatory, as well as an image URL, and whether or not it's accepted, which is, just true or false Boolean. And so this is a very simple example, but as you can see, this is where the creativeness comes in developing a subgraph. When you get into very complex, protocols like Uniswap or something else out there like Yearn, there's a bunch of different ways you could decide to display data to the public. And, maybe you're doing it for data analysis yourself and you want to ingest it into some sort of Python script or that's going to analyze this data. And so it comes down to, like, this is, the first level, deciding where you want or how you want that information to be stored. And once you get there, you can start moving on to writing mappings. And so if we keep scrolling down here, there's a lot more information here that I recommend you all look at if you're going to build a subgraph, and it's very informative, but we're not going to go over it today because there's a ton to go over, and it could take a really long time. So now we can get into writing the mappings of a subgraph, which is it's kind of like the bulk of the work. If you look at the subgraph schema, that is defining what you're trying to do, but it might take a few hours of planning to get there. Whereas writing the mappings is where you see the bulk of actual code written, because you're basically, a mapping is some code that's going to map over the data that is coming directly from the blockchain and fitting it in to your database and your subgraph, like exactly how you want it. So as you can see here, we're actually building that entity type we created before, the Gravatar. We're creating a new Gravatar with an ID right here, and we're storing its owner, its display name, and its image URL into the subgraph, into the database, and then we're saving it into the subgraph. And now all of a sudden we've taken that data on chain and we've stored it into the subgraph. And you can do this in an infinite amount of ways. This is a very simple example, but as I said before, all this data analysis stuff can be built with a lot of storing of different entities that represent specific days. It could be even specific hours or minutes for kind of like trading like projects that somebody's trying to look at historical prices, as well as, you know, the whole entire graph network itself, which runs on Ethereum, has its own subgraph. And this subgraph gets all the data out from the graph network, and it ends up becoming very rich, actually, because you can take this raw data that is stored on Ethereum and build, you know, historical time series or create new values that aren't stored on chain and store them in the subgraph. And it's all deterministic because of how the graph network is set up. And this allows a bunch of indexers around the world in the graph network to be able to run these subgraphs and serve up queries for them. And so now we're going to get into a little example. There's a lot more information here in the docs if you end up building a subgraph yourself. But I'm going to go back to the Explorer and start with creating a subgraph. And so if you go to the Explorer, you click on your profile, you log in with GitHub, you can create a subgraph. And that's what I'm going to do right here. And we're just going to call this subgraph 2. Because I can't think of a better name right now. And subtitle, I'm just going to call it a practice subgraph. So here you would, you know, you'd pick a picture, you'd pick a real subgraph name, and add a description if you want, add a GitHub URL if you want, and choose to hide it if you want, which means it won't show up to the public in the Graph Explorer. And I'm going to choose to hide it because it's just a practice subgraph that I'm making. So you create this subgraph in the Explorer UI, and you get to this page, and you have this subgraph is created, but it hasn't been deployed to the hosted service. And that's what we want to do. And so you'll see you have an access token up here. That's for your unique account. And what we're going to do is we're going to go and follow the commands that are right here to be able to get this project started. So click show commands. First thing to do is run yarn global add graph protocol graph CLI. And I can just copy that here by pressing this. And now I'm going to go to my terminal. Can you guys still see this, by the way?
Yes, everything's clear.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I'm adding Graph CLI to my computer, and then, you know, we can go back to the Google Chrome and keep continuing along. So there's this command called graph init, which starts a project from scratch. It's like an example project, and we're going to copy that, and it's going to create that gravatar example that I was talking about before, and showing in the in the documentation. So what I do here is replace these placeholders with APCAD subgraph 2. What I'm basically saying is to create this subgraph with graph init. And we're just going to wait for this to get installed here. Great, perfect. So I have now created this subgraph, and it's the gravatar subgraph. And if we look, there's now a folder called gravatar. And what I'll actually do is open this with VS Code. And what we're going to see is, you know, all these files have been created with graph init. And this is basically your, you know, base example code repository for starting the subgraph. And here you can actually see the files. Just gonna allow that. Here you're going to see the files I was just describing previously. So the subgraph YAML gets created automatically. This is what, like I said before, auto-generated. And this is the exact thing I was describing before, right? We have Ethereum. We're indexing that network. We're indexing the Ethereum mainnet, which you can get even more specific there because you could be doing a test net. We're doing this contract, which is called Gravity, and we're handling these two events. And we've also identified the mapping that we're going to be using as well. And if we go here, we have another simple entity type, the schema that we created, and it's just storing an owner and its display name and an image URL. And the other file that we have here is the mapping file. And this is all written in TypeScript. So as we said earlier in this presentation, the combination of TypeScript and GraphQL, or knowing GraphQL, basically allows you to be a subgraph developer. And it's also helpful to be able to know Solidity because you might be reading Ethereum smart contract code and then determining how you want to write your mappings. And it's not strictly necessary to know Solidity, but it helps to be able to read it. And it's actually quite an easy language for people to read, even if they've never coded it before. And so, as you can see, a lot of the mappings of bigger subgraphs can be hundreds of lines of code. And this is where the bulk of the work usually is. Whereas the manifest might be a few hundred lines, the schema might be a few hundred lines, but this could be thousands of lines of code. And all we're doing is we're creating a new entity type, the gravatar, which we've identified in the schema. And we are storing it with this ID that comes from the event new gravatar. And if we quickly go, this is now Solidity code that I'm showing you. And as you can see in the Solidity, there's these two events, new gravatar and updated gravatar, which are emitting, these four fields: ID, owner, display name, and image URL. So this is how the whole system connects here. And we're now taking these event parameters, which are event params.owner, event params.displayname, event params.image URL, and we're storing it into the new object or entity we created, gravatar, and saving it into the database or the subgraph. And that's really, that's the bulk of a subgraph. You're going to see all these other files that are auto-generated here that, are important for a developer, and you obviously have to understand how they would work if you're going to create a subgraph. But for all intents and purposes, a lot of this stuff is copy pasted or taken from, these contracts were written by somebody else, so they're taken, and then we're using them, and we're using their ABIs as well, like the Gravity ABI here. These are all things that we didn't write ourselves. We just have to put them in the repository and understand how to use them. And so ultimately, as the subgraph developer, the bulk of your work is writing the mappings and creating the schema and creating the subgraph manifests. And so going over all that code, now we understand that we have this subgraph that's almost complete, or it isn't complete, and we can actually deploy it to the hosted service. So right now, I'm actually going to do that. And first, if we go back to here, I still have to write yarn. I still have to run yarn install and yarn codegen. So I'm going to do that really quickly. And yarn codegen. And these are just commands that need to run to set up the subgraph, basically. And so now we're done this section. And so we've done the install, we've done the init, and now we need to deploy. You can see here, you have to run graph auth with this string right here and your access token. So I will copy that, paste it in my terminal, remove this placeholder, get my access token from the Explorer, paste that. And this just authorizes my computer to be able to deploy to the hosted service by using this key. And if we go back to the commands here, now I want to run graph deploy. And so we're going to do this. Replace subgraph name with subgraph 2. And so now it's actually deploying to the hosted service, and we're going to see it in the hosted service in a few seconds once it actually gets there. And so you want to see all these green check marks to make sure that everything's working as intended, to make sure that it actually gets there. And as you can see, it says deployed to this URL. So if we click it, we can now see that this subgraph exists in the hosted service, and you can start analyzing it. It comes up with an example query for the gravatars. And if I click it, here's this data, and this data has all been indexed by a graph node, and it's basically operating exactly as you described the subgraph to operate. And you're seeing all this stored data in the subgraph, and there's a bunch of different ways you can write different queries, right? You can do skip 5. I won't get into the details of this because it's like GraphQL heavy stuff. But at the end of the day, this is now on the hosted service. You can share it with people. People can see it in public, and anybody can start getting the data from here, which is what makes the graph so powerful. If you build a really useful subgraph that emits really interesting data, you might have a ton of people querying it, and then it just starts adding to the ecosystem of the whole of the graph, where you have this query market that works, and people are paying for queries, and thus all these indexers are running machines around the world and actually indexing all this stuff. And you have a curation market and the delegation market and everything, and it works. When you get all the pieces working together, it creates this amazing economic system. And then you can also go into the details of the subgraph and see if there's any errors. Like if you deploy it and there's an error, it'll say error up here. And then you can look into the debugging of the logs and actually see what the error is. And if there was an error, you would go back to your code and you would figure out what it is and you'd fix it, and you would just redeploy and keep updating your subgraph as you need. And so that's pretty much the whole presentation. It's a really simple explanation of how to deploy a subgraph. And in the event that you actually do, there's unlimited opportunities for subgraphs that can be built in the graph network.
Awesome. That stuff is, I love it. I mean, I can't help it. And it was such a practical example. I'm sure that lots of our students will give it a try. We love hands-on stuff. At university, we study a lot of theory. So like seeing this practical thing where we can get our hands dirty, building something, deploying it so quickly, this is amazing. So we have a few questions. If you want to take a look at them in the Q&A section and offer an answer to our students.
Yeah, I'm reading right now. Every time I query the graph because I want to gather some data from blockchain, someone's computer explores the whole blockchain to provide me with such information, right? Yeah, so exactly. Like if you're going to get Uniswap information from a subgraph, that Uniswap subgraph that exists on the hosted service would have a specific subset of Uniswap data that subgraph developer created. Now there could be multiple Uniswap subgraphs. One might show historical data, one might show live data. So that would be up to you to figure out what you need. But essentially that data that is being shown to you from a subgraph has all been created from, yes, an indexer going from the very start of the Uniswap protocol being deployed to the current Ethereum block that exists today, like the head block. So yes, to answer your question, everything from Ethereum that has historically been has happened is what you're looking at. You just have to make sure that when you go to a subgraph, it says like 100% synced, because if it's not, it means they're still maybe halfway and it wouldn't be live data yet. All right, I'm reading the next one now. I miss how by querying a normal HTTP endpoint called load balancer in previous slide, I can pay the indexer to run my query. Maybe it is I just don't understand the workflow. And then I was wondering if you have to run a full ETH node as an indexer, and how do you plan to scale this architecture to support more blockchains? Perfect. So to answer the first question, so if you're using the hosted service, which is kind of what I just showed you there, it's a subset of the graph network. It's just really a service that is being run so people can play with the graph network and get used to it. And it's actually free. So we're running a graph node in the cloud, and you can query it, and this is being returned for free. Obviously, there's infrastructure running somewhere, but that's how it works right now. Now, if you go to the graph network, which is live right now, and we are migrating actual subgraphs over to the graph network over the next couple weeks, couple months, then you'll be in a situation where yes, you do have to pay for queries, and that, depending how the whole setup works with a lot of the first subgraphs that'll be on the network, it won't necessarily be a user logging into a website and paying a fraction of a cent for a query. It could be kind of like bundled up in the sense where if someone's making millions of queries, or like a dApp, like the Uniswap dApp might be making millions of queries, that one person or that one entity who wants to make those millions of queries is going to set up a state channel on the graph network. And if a million queries ends up equaling $500, it'll be one person or one group or one entity depositing $500 into a state channel. And maybe that's for a dApp, right? So maybe that dApp has thousands of users. Now they're subsidizing those queries for those thousands of users that they have by paying $500 in the state channel. And that's kind of like a system that we could see play out like naturally in the next couple of weeks, months, as opposed to every person logging into their browser and paying a fraction of a cent. That's not necessarily set up right now. In the future, like in blockchain, maybe some world exists where that is happening, not only for the graph, but it could be happening for many other protocols that could be running in like, a Google Chrome browser. If it's Brave or something, there's all these ads that are running, and maybe you're getting paid to watch these ads. And at the same time, you are paying for queries that you're making, and all these different transactions are happening. But that's kind of like getting into the weeds of where blockchain protocols can go. So ultimately, yeah, that's kind of how queries could end up being paid in the next couple of weeks and months. And then it's another good question. As an indexer, do you have to run a full ETH node? And so, yeah, if you're going to be an indexer in the graph network, you have to have access to an ETH full node, which either means you're going to, let's say you're an indexer and you're running some hardware either at home or in a co-located center somewhere else, like remotely. You're paying for that. You're paying for that architecture yourself, right? And then you would need access to an Ethereum node, which means you might also be running an Ethereum node at home, which would probably be hard, or in like a co-location center, which might be a little bit easier if you have some powerful machinery there. And so you could do that and run your own, and that will actually be cheaper in the long term. What you could also do is query and pay for an Ethereum node through a service provider. So there's a lot of companies out there, like ones like Alchemy or ones like Infura, that will run Ethereum nodes and then charge people to use them. So as you can imagine, you could query this Ethereum node, and that is how you're going to build the subgraph, from block 0 to block 12 million. And you could hit your own Ethereum node, which is going to be cheaper, or you could pay Infura to run an Ethereum node that you can hit 24/7 and should have 99.9 something percent uptime. And then you can build that subgraph, and once that subgraph is built, you can then start serving queries to people, and then you're participating in the graph network as an indexer.
Okay, I think that concludes all the questions and the entire presentation. I think it was amazing. Thank you so much, Eva, David, Reem. I know that she's behind the scenes. She helped Tegan with the difficulties at the beginning. Thank you, Tegan, as well. This was amazing for us. We don't get this kind of content. Obviously, this is cutting edge technologies, and there's a lot of innovation not only in the graph, but in the overall blockchain ecosystem. So that's why we're trying to push this blockchain series that we've hosted over the past week. And we're sure that lots of our students that couldn't attend the event live today, because, you know, we have classes with all this online mess that we're all involved in, they will watch the YouTube recording, which will be available either tonight at some point, tomorrow, or by the end of the week for sure. But yeah, all this stuff for us is priceless. As I mentioned in the previous event with Chainlink, the whole thing hopefully helps us to, you know, get started with blockchain. We have 2 amazing projects to refer to. And from me, from the rest of the core team, and from all the students who can't really participate, you know, like speaking and stuff, thank you so much, because you guys are in California, right? So the time difference wasn't easy to manage.
Yeah,
Sorry.
for sure. Yeah, thanks so much. It was a lot of fun.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And until the next event, bye.
Yeah, have a great day.
You too.